The year is 541 AD. In a small fishing village on the eastern coast of Britain, a young woman named Ælfgifu kneels beside a shallow grave she has dug with her own hands. The soil is still dark, still wet from a rain that has refused to fall properly for almost 5 years. Inside the grave lies her youngest son. He was 3 years old. He died not from the sickness everyone is whispering about, the sickness that has not yet reached this shore. He died from hunger. He died because there has been no real summer in this land since the sun went dark in the year 536, and the wheat in the fields has grown thin and pale, and the cows have given milk that tastes of nothing, and the sheep have died in the snow that fell in June. Ælfgifu does not yet know that within the year ships will arrive at the southern harbours carrying grain from Gaul. She does not know that hidden in the sacks of that grain, hidden in the dark fur of the rats that crawl between the barrels, there are tiny fleas, and inside those fleas there is a bacterium so small the human eye cannot see it. She does not know that this bacterium has a name that historians will not give it for 1400 years. Yersinia pestis. She does not know that her grief, the grief she feels right now, kneeling beside this grave, is only the beginning. Because the worst thing that has ever happened to the human race is about to arrive on the shores of her island, and before it is finished, it will kill 50 million people across the known world. Welcome back to Walter Reconstructs History. If you watched my previous video about the year 536, the year the sun went dark, the year a volcanic winter shattered civilization across 2 continents, then what I'm about to tell you is the second act of that catastrophe. Because the cold that came in 536 did not end. The crops that failed did not recover. The people who survived the famine were weakened, malnourished, packed into towns and villages where the rats had grown bold from years of hunger. And in the year 541, in the port city of Pelusium in Egypt, a sickness began that would sweep across the entire world. Historians today call it the Plague of Justinian, named after the Roman emperor who reigned at the time and who himself would catch it and barely survive. But for the people who lived through it, it had no name. It was simply the death, the pestilence, the end of the world. Over the next 35 minutes, I'm going to take you inside that world. We are not going to talk about kings and battles and grand strategies, because that is not how the people of the 6th century experienced this catastrophe. We are going to walk into the wattle and daub houses of Dark Age Britain. We are going to sit beside the hearths of farming families. We are going to smell the smoke, hear the prayers, watch the rats. We are going to understand as best we can what it actually felt like to live through the first great pandemic in recorded history. So, sit back, settle in, and let me show you the Britain that history almost forgot. To understand why this plague was so devastating, you have to understand what Britain looked like in the year 540. Roman rule had collapsed more than 100 years before. The legions had marched away from these shores in 410 AD, called back to defend a crumbling empire that would itself fall within decades. What they left behind was not a kingdom. It was a patchwork of small territories, some still clinging to the memory of Roman civilization, others already swallowed by new waves of Germanic settlers who had been arriving from across the North Sea for generations. The Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, the Frisians. They came in long wooden boats with shallow keels, carrying their wives and children, their cattle and their gods. They did not come to destroy, they came to live. And by the year 540, they had settled across most of the eastern half of Britain, while the native Britons, the people who spoke a language that would become Welsh, held the western half, from Cornwall up through Wales and into the lands beyond Hadrian's old wall. These two peoples lived very differently. The Britons in the west still had cities, or at least the bones of them. Places like Wroxeter, like Caerwent, like Carlisle still had standing Roman walls, still had Christian bishops, still had families who could read Latin. But these cities were shrinking. The population had been falling for over a century. The aqueducts had stopped working. People had moved out into the countryside where they could grow their own food and protect themselves from raiders. The Anglo-Saxons in the east lived differently. They did not build cities. They lived in villages of 10 or 20 families, in long rectangular houses made of timber and clay, with thatched roofs and earthen floors. They grew barley and wheat and rye. They kept pigs and cattle and sheep. They worshipped Woden and Thunor and Frigg, the gods they had brought with them from across the sea, and they had no idea that anything was about to change. Imagine yourself for a moment as a young man living in one of these Anglo-Saxon villages in the spring of 541. Your name might be Sinewulf. You are 16 years old. You have lived your entire life through what the older people in your village call the cold years. You were born just after the sun went dark, and you have only the faintest memory of what a proper summer is supposed to feel like. In your lifetime, the harvests have been thin every single year. Some years, there has been famine. 2 of your siblings died before you were 10, one from hunger, one from a sickness that came after the hunger. Your mother lost 3 babies in the cold years. The fields that your grandfather ploughed are now overgrown with bracken because there are not enough hands to work them. And yet, you are alive. You can swing a scythe and you can milk a cow and you can repair the thatch on the roof of your father's house. You have begun to notice the daughter of the family across the way, a girl named Ethelflaed, and she has begun to notice you. You think that perhaps next year, if the harvest is good, your father will speak to her father, and there will be a wedding feast. This is your hope. This is your plan. You do not know that within the year, you will be digging graves for everyone you love. The plague did not arrive in Britain in a single moment. It did not announce itself. The first signs would have been almost invisible. A few sick rats found dead in a granary, a flea bite that swelled and would not heal, a man who came home from the harbour complaining of a headache and a fever and went to bed and did not wake up. But once it began, it spread with a speed that the human mind cannot fully grasp. Yersinia pestis is one of the most efficient killers ever to emerge from the natural world. The bacterium lives in the gut of a flea. When the flea bites a rat, the bacterium enters the rat's bloodstream and the rat dies, usually within a few days. The flea, hungry and now without a host, jumps to another animal. If there are no more rats nearby because they have all died, the flea will jump to whatever warm body it can find. A dog, a pig, a human being. And once it bites a human being, the catastrophe begins. When Yersinia pestis enters a human bloodstream, the body's immune system responds the way it always does. The bacteria are swept up by white blood cells and carried to the nearest lymph node, where they are supposed to be destroyed. But Yersinia pestis has a trick. It cannot be destroyed by white blood cells. Instead, it begins to multiply inside them, faster than the body can respond. Within 2 or 3 days of being bitten, the victim begins to feel ill, a headache, a chill, a sense that something is deeply wrong. By the 3rd or 4th day, the lymph nodes themselves begin to swell. In the groin, in the armpits, on the neck, they swell to the size of an egg, sometimes the size of an apple. They turn purple, then black. These are the buboes that would give the disease its later name, the bubonic plague. The fever rises. The victim becomes delirious. They speak to people who are not there. they scream at shadows, they beg for water, and then, somewhere between the 5th day and the 7th day, in roughly 6 out of every 10 cases, they die. They die in agony, often coughing up black blood, their skin mottled with patches of dead tissue, their eyes wild with a terror that no one who has not seen it can imagine. Now imagine that this is happening, not to one person but to your entire family. Imagine you wake up one morning and your little sister is hot to the touch. By evening she is shaking with chills. By the next morning there is a lump in her armpit the size of a walnut. By the morning after that, the lump is the size of a hen's egg, and it has turned the colour of a bruise, and she is screaming when anyone touches her. By the 4th day, your sister is dead. By the 5th day, your mother has the same fever. By the 7th day, your mother is dead. By the 10th day, your father, your 2 brothers, the priest who came to perform the last rites, the gravedigger who buried your mother, all of them are dead. By the end of the month, half of your village is dead, and there is no one to bury them. The bodies lie in the houses where they fell, and the smell rises into the spring air, and the birds come, and the rats come, and the dogs come, and you, somehow, miraculously, are still alive. This is what happened. This is what actually happened to thousands of villages across the known world between 541 and 549 AD. The historian Procopius, who lived in Constantinople and witnessed the plague firsthand, wrote that at the height of the outbreak in the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, 10,000 people were dying every single day. 10,000 every day for months. The bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. Emperor Justinian ordered massive pits to be dug across the Bosphorus, and bodies were thrown in by the thousands. When the pits were full, people began throwing bodies into the towers of the city walls, sealing them up like macabre tombs. Procopius wrote that it seemed as if the human race was about to be wiped from the earth, and what was happening in Constantinople was happening, in varying degrees, everywhere. The plague spread along the trade routes of the late Roman world. It travelled by ship from Egypt to every port on the Mediterranean. It moved up the rivers into Gaul. It crossed the Alps into Italy. It reached Spain. It reached North Africa. It reached, eventually, the islands of the north. The evidence suggests it came to Britain in 2 waves. The first wave likely reached the Western Britons sometime around 544 or 545. We know this because of a remarkable Welsh chronicle called the Annales Cambriae, which records that in the year 547 a great mortality swept through Britain, and that one of its victims was Maelgwn Gwynedd, a king of North Wales. Maelgwn, according to legend, locked himself in a church to escape the plague, and looking through a keyhole, he saw the yellow spectre of the death itself approaching him, and he died of fright. We do not have to believe the literal truth of this story to understand what it tells us. The plague had come to Britain, and the kings themselves were not safe. But here is what is most strange about the plague in Britain. It seems to have struck the Britons in the west far more heavily than the Anglo-Saxons in the east. We can see this in the archaeology. The Britons, who still lived in or near the old Roman cities, who still traded with Gaul, were hit again and again by waves of plague throughout the 6th century. Their population collapsed. Their kingdoms shrank. Whole regions that had been densely populated since Roman times became empty within a generation. Meanwhile, the Anglo-Saxons, who lived in scattered farming villages, who had little contact with the Mediterranean trade routes, seem to have suffered far less. The plague did not just kill people, it shifted the balance of power in Britain forever. The Britons grew weaker, the Anglo-Saxons grew stronger, and the language, the religion, the very identity of the island began to change. But before we talk about what the plague meant for the long history of Britain, I want to take you deeper into what it meant for the people who actually lived through it, because numbers do not tell you what it feels like to lose your mother. Maps do not tell you what it sounds like to hear a child cry through a fever that you know is going to kill her. Statistics do not tell you what it smells like when a village dies. So let us go back to Ælfgifu, kneeling beside the grave of her son, and let us walk with her through the year 547, the year the plague arrived. It was spring when she first heard the news. A trader had come up from the south with a load of salt and iron, and he had stayed for one night in her father's house, and he had drunk too much of her father's ale, and he had spoken of strange things. He had spoken of a sickness in Gaul. He had spoken of villages emptied of people, of cattle wandering loose because there was no one to herd them, of churches with no priests. Ælfgifu had listened from the corner of the room where she sat carding wool, and she had felt something cold move through her chest. The trader had left in the morning. 2 weeks later, in the village 3 miles to the south, the first cases appeared. A boy who had bought a knife from the trader's stall, the boy's mother who had washed his sweaty clothes, the boy's grandfather who had held him as he died. Within a month, the village 3 miles to the south was a place of corpses. Now imagine you are Ælfgifu. You are perhaps 24 years old. You have already lost one son to the cold years. You have one daughter, 6 years old, named Hild. You have a husband, Beorhtric, who is a fisherman. You have heard what is happening in the village to the south, and you know with a certainty that no one has explained to you and that you do not understand that it is coming. You begin to do small things. You move your daughter's bedding closer to the hearth. You go to the old shrine at the edge of the woods, the shrine that the priests have told you is wicked, and you leave an offering of bread and milk and a small piece of amber. You do not pray to Woden anymore, not exactly, because the Christian missionaries have come to your village and you have been baptized, but you do not pray to Christ either, because Christ is far away and Woden is close, and you are afraid. You ask whoever is listening to spare your daughter. You ask whoever is listening to spare your husband, and then you go home, and you wait. It comes in the heat of summer. The first to fall is the old man at the end of the village. He sickens on a Tuesday. He is dead by Friday. By the following week, 3 more people are sick. By the week after that, 10. And then, one evening in the middle of August, your daughter Hild comes to you and says her head hurts, and she is cold even though it is still warm outside. You feel her forehead, it burns. You feel her neck. There is a swelling there, small, like a pebble under the skin that was not there yesterday, and you sit down on the floor of your house and you cannot breathe. I want to pause here for just a moment because I know this is heavy material. If you have made it this far, if these stories are moving you the way I hope they are moving you, then this is the kind of history that I love to bring to this channel, and the only way I can keep making it is if you help me. So, I want to ask you, right here, in the middle of this video, to please hit the like button below. It costs you nothing, it takes 1 second, and it tells YouTube that this kind of deep historical storytelling matters. And if you have not yet subscribed to Walter Reconstructs History, please do. I make videos like this one every week. We are walking together through the forgotten centuries of human history, and I do not want you to miss what is coming. So pause for 1 second, hit subscribe, hit the like button, and let us continue this journey into the worst year of Ælfgifu's life, because the worst is still ahead of her. You hold Hild through the night. You hold her even though her skin is so hot that it hurts your arms. You hold her even though she's whimpering and crying out for things you do not understand, calling for her grandmother who has been dead for 2 years, calling for a dog she had once when she was 3. You hold her because that is all you can do. By morning, the swelling on her neck is the size of a small egg. By the second night, the size of a hen's egg. By the third morning, it has turned dark purple. And there is another swelling under her arm, and her breath is coming in short gasps. And you know with the terrible certainty that mothers have always known, that she is not going to live. Your husband Beorhtric stands in the doorway and cannot enter. He cannot bear to come close. He stands in the doorway and he weeps. And you do not weep, because you have to hold your daughter, and weeping is not what holding requires. She dies on the fourth day, just before dawn. She is 6 years old. You wrap her in the linen sheet that was part of your wedding dowry, the only fine cloth you own. You carry her yourself, because there is no one else to carry her, and you walk past the houses of the village where other mothers are starting to keen, and you walk to the small burial ground at the edge of the wheat field, and there you dig her grave, and there you lay her down. You understand, in that moment, that you have just become one of those women that the old stories speak of, the mother who buries her child. You do not know yet that your husband will be dead within 10 days. You do not know yet that you yourself will be sick within 2 weeks, and that somehow, against all odds, you will live. You do not know yet that out of the 47 souls who lived in your village in the spring of 547, only 11 will see the spring of 548. You only know that you are kneeling in a field with a small dead body, and that the world has just ended, and that the sun is rising anyway. This is what the Plague of Justinian did. It did this, not once, but tens of millions of times. Across the entire known world, from the deserts of Persia to the moors of northern England, families went through what Ælfgifu went through. The total death toll has been debated by historians for centuries. The most careful modern estimates, based on archaeological evidence on burial sites, on genetic studies of the bacterium itself, suggest that the first wave of the plague, between 541 and 549, killed somewhere between 30 and 50 million people. In a world population of perhaps 200 million, that is a fifth to a quarter of all human beings on Earth, gone in less than a decade. To put that into perspective, the Black Death of the 14th century, which is far better known, killed perhaps 50 to 75 million people. The Plague of Justinian killed nearly as many, but it did so to a society that was already weakened, already starving, already broken by the cold years that had come before. And the plague did not stop in 549. It came back. It came back again and again in waves for the next 200 years. There were major outbreaks in Britain in the 660s, in the 680s, in the 740s. Each wave killed fewer people than the first because the survivors had some immunity, but each wave still killed. Some scholars believe that by the year 750, the population of Britain was perhaps half what it had been in the year 535. Half. Whole villages that had existed in Roman times were never reoccupied. Whole regions reverted to forest. The road networks decayed because there was no one to maintain them. The old Roman cities became ghost towns. I want to take you now into a different village. I want to take you into a Christian monastery in the Western Kingdoms, in a place that would one day be called Wales. The year is 549. The plague has been raging for 2 years in this region. The monastery is a small place. There are 17 monks. There were 34 monks a year ago. The abbot, a man named Brother Cadog, is 42 years old, and he has been awake for most of the past week because the brothers keep dying, and someone has to be with them when they die, and someone has to bury them, and someone has to ring the bell for matins, even when there are only a few brothers left to chant the psalms. Brother Cadog had a vision when the plague first came. He saw, in a dream, a blackbird flying over the land, and wherever the shadow of the bird fell, the people beneath it grew cold and died. He took the vision as a sign that the end times were beginning, that the world was about to be unmade, and that he and his brothers must redouble their prayers, must fast more strictly. They did all of these things. They prayed through the nights. They went without food for 3 days at a stretch. They walked barefoot through the snow in winter, and still they died. Brother Madoc, who had taught Cadog Latin, died in the first month. Brother Paidan, who had illuminated the gospel book they kept on the altar, died in the second. Brother Iltud, just a boy of 15 who had come to the monastery only the year before because his entire family had been wiped out, died in the third. And Brother Cadog, in his cell at night, began to wonder if perhaps prayer was not enough. He began to wonder if perhaps God was not listening. He began to wonder if there even was a God. He continued to ring the bell for matins, and continued to chant the psalms, and continued to bury the dead. But somewhere inside him, something cracked. This is one of the great untold stories of the Plague of Justinian. It was, in a very real sense, a crisis of faith. The pagan Anglo-Saxons in the east had their gods, Woden and Thuna and Frege, but these were not gods who had ever promised to protect their followers from disaster. The Anglo-Saxons knew that the world was a hard place, that the gods were capricious. They had a word for it: weird fate, the unstoppable river of what is going to happen. The plague was terrible for them, but it did not destroy their understanding of the universe. But the Christians, the Britons in the West, had been taught something very different. They had been taught that there was one God who loved them, who would protect them if they prayed and fasted and were good. And now, this God seemed to be sending them a death that no prayer could stop. Their bishops were dying, their saints were dying, the relics that had been said to cure illnesses were no help against this. Whole monasteries were emptying out. The faith of the Western Britons did not collapse exactly, but it was shaken in ways that historians are still uncovering. But while the Western Christians were struggling, something very different was happening in the East. Among the Anglo-Saxons, the plague seems to have been less culturally devastating. Their villages were more scattered. Their religious worldview was already prepared for disaster. And critically, in the century that followed the worst of the plague, the Anglo-Saxons grew. They expanded westward into lands the Britons could no longer hold. They founded new kingdoms in Wessex, in Mercia, in Northumbria. The old Brittonic kingdoms of the west, the kingdoms of Reged and Elmet and Gwynedd, fought back, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes desperately, but they were fighting from a position of weakness. And by the year 700, the map of Britain had been redrawn. The Anglo-Saxons controlled most of what we now call England. The Britons had been pushed back into Wales, into Cornwall, into the Highlands of Scotland, and the English language, the language that you and I are speaking now, had begun its long journey to dominance. It is one of the strange and uncomfortable truths of history that this language, the language of Shakespeare and Milton, and every English book you have ever read, exists in part because of a plague that killed millions of people in the 6th century. If the Cold Years had not happened, if the plague had not followed the Cold Years, if the Britons had not been weakened more than the Saxons, then perhaps Welsh, or something like Welsh, might have been the language spoken in London. We cannot know for sure. History is not an experiment we can rerun. But what we do know is that the events of the years 536 to 549 changed the trajectory of Britain forever, and that those events were ultimately driven by climate and by disease, by forces that no king and no army could fight. Let me take you now into the daily life of those who survived. Imagine that you are Ælfgifu, 2 years after the plague has passed through your village. It is the spring of 549. You are 26 years old. You are a widow. Your daughter is dead. Your husband is dead. Your mother-in-law is dead. Of the original 47 people in your village, 11 are still alive, and most of them are too old or too young to work the fields. The houses stand empty. You moved out of your own house 6 months ago because you could not bear to sleep in the place where Hild had died. You sleep now in the small house that belonged to your husband's brother, who also is dead. You work the fields with the other survivors. There are not enough of you to plant the full acreage that was once planted, so you plant only the closest fields, and you let the rest go. The bracken is already coming up in them. Within a few years, they will be forest again. You think about this sometimes when you are working, how the world is taking itself back, how the great labor of generations to clear the land for farming is being undone by simple absence. You wonder if anyone will be here in another 100 years to remember what your village was, or whether the trees will have grown over it and the place will simply be gone, as if it had never existed. But you also notice as the years pass that some things are changing in unexpected ways, because so few people are left. There is more food for those who remain. The thin harvests of the cold years now feed 11 people instead of 47, and so each person eats better than they ever ate before. There is more meat in the winter because the same number of pigs feeds fewer mouths. The few children who have been born since the plague, the children of the survivors, are bigger and healthier than the children of your generation were. They are, in the strange, cruel arithmetic of a catastrophe, the beneficiaries of the deaths of millions. This was a pattern that historians have noticed across the entire post-plague world. Survivors of the great pandemics of history often experienced, paradoxically, a kind of golden age. Wages went up because labor was scarce. Land was available for the taking because so many landowners had died without heirs. The same thing would happen 700 years later in the wake of the Black Death, when the surviving European peasants were able to bargain their way out of serfdom, and it happened in a smaller way after the Plague of Justinian. The Anglo-Saxon farmers who survived found themselves in a world where land was suddenly cheap and labor was suddenly precious. Some of them grew wealthy. Some of them became the founders of the great families that would, 2 and 3 centuries later, rule the kingdoms of Anglo-Saxon England. But this is not a story of redemption. There is no redemption in the Plague of Justinian. There is only the cold fact that life continued, that the dead were buried, and the fields were planted, and the children grew up and grew old and died, and the world that emerged was not the world that had existed before. The Britain of the year 600 was a poorer place than the Britain of 535. There were fewer people, there were fewer cities, there was less learning. The Roman past was already becoming a kind of legend, half remembered, half invented. People walked through the ruins of Wroxeter and Caerleon and London and did not know who had built them. They told stories of giants, they told stories of magical kings, they told stories that would eventually become the legends of Arthur and Merlin and the lost glory of a vanished age. The myth of a golden age, a time of justice and prosperity and brave knights and beautiful queens, was in many ways a response to the actual disaster that the 6th century had been. People could not bear to admit that there had been no golden age, only a long, slow decline. So they invented one, and they placed it just out of reach, just over the horizon in the time before they were born. And while the surviving Britons were beginning to remember their past as a lost paradise, the Anglo-Saxons were beginning to invent their future. They were starting to organize themselves into kingdoms. They were starting to build great timber halls, halls big enough to hold 100 warriors, halls with carved gables and painted shields. They were starting to compose poetry, long heroic poems that would one day be written down as Beowulf and the Wanderer and the Seafarer. The Wanderer, especially, is a poem that seems to come straight out of the world the plague left behind. It is the lament of a man who has lost everyone he loves, who travels through a country full of empty halls and abandoned villages. Listen to this fragment in modern English. Where has the horse gone? Where the warrior? Where is the giver of treasure? Where are the seats of the feast? Where are the hall joys? Alas, the bright cup! Alas, the mailed warrior! Alas, the splendour of the prince! How that time has passed away, grown dark under the cover of night, as if it had never been. That is the voice of the post-plague world. That is the voice of the people who walked through the ruins and tried to make sense of what had happened. There is no triumphalism in it. There is no hope of restoration. There is only the steady, sorrowful acknowledgement that something has been lost which cannot be brought back. Let us return one last time to our friends. Ælfgifu lived to be old by the standards of her time. She lived to be perhaps 55 or 60. She never had another child. She never remarried, though there were opportunities in the years after Beorhtric's death. She turned them down. She did not want to risk loving anything that much again. She lived in the small house that had belonged to her husband's brother for the rest of her life. She kept a few chickens. She wove cloth for the village. She became, over time, one of those old women that every village in Anglo-Saxon Britain seems to have had, a kind of unofficial keeper of memory. The young people came to her when they wanted to know what had happened in the old times, in the years before the plague. She told them stories about her daughter Hild, the daughter who had laughed at the sight of a hare running across a field, the daughter who had once tried to feed honey to a wasp. She did not tell them about the swellings or the screaming or the smell. She kept those things for herself. She died in the spring of the year 581, on a morning when the sun came up clear and warm over the fields. Her neighbours found her in her bed. There was a small smile on her face, or so they said. She was buried in the small burial ground at the edge of the wheat field, beside her daughter, beside her husband. The grave was unmarked. We do not know exactly where it is. The village she lived in has long since vanished. The wheat field has long since become forest. There is nothing left of Ælfgifu, nothing at all except this story, and this story is mostly imagined. But many millions of people like her did exist. They lived, and they grieved, and they buried their children, and they were forgotten, every single one of them, by everyone who has ever lived since. And yet, they were here. They walked these hills, they felt the sun on their faces, they held their children, and they wept, and they laughed, and they died, and they made, with their own hands and their own hearts, the world that you and I have inherited. Brother Cadog also lived to be old. He never recovered the simple faith of his youth, but he came to a different kind of faith, a harder one, a quieter one. He came to believe that God was not a being who protected his people from disaster, but a presence who suffered alongside them, who walked beside them through the dark valleys, who could not always stop the bad things from happening, but who refused to abandon his people, no matter what came. This is, in some ways, a more sophisticated theology than the simple, protective faith that the plague had shattered. And it is the theology that you find, in slightly different forms, in the great Christian writers who emerged in Britain in the 7th and 8th centuries, in figures like Bede and Aldhelm and Cuthbert. They were the spiritual descendants of men like Brother Cadog. They had inherited a faith that had been broken and remade. They knew in a way that the comfortable Christians of the late Roman Empire had not known, that being a Christian did not mean being safe. It meant being faithful even when there was no safety. Brother Cadog died in the year 569. He was 62 years old. By that point, his monastery had grown again, slowly, painfully. There were 23 monks. The newer ones did not remember the plague years. They listened to Brother Cadog when he told them about the brothers who had died, and they nodded respectfully, but they could not quite imagine it, the way young people never quite can. He was buried in the small graveyard beside the church. His grave was marked with a simple stone with a cross carved on it. The monastery was destroyed by Viking raiders 300 years later. The stone is gone. The river still runs past the hillside, grey and slow. And what of our young Anglo-Saxon Sinewulf, the 16-year-old boy whose hopes for his future were just beginning when the plague arrived? I told you at the start of this video that he would be digging graves for everyone he loved, and he was. The girl he had begun to notice, Aethelflaed, died in the second wave of the plague that struck their village in 548. Sinewulf himself survived, but only barely. He caught the sickness in the autumn of that year. He lay in his bed for 10 days with a fever that should have killed him. He saw in his delirium visions of his dead grandfather, who told him in the vision that he must live, that he had a part to play, that the gods had not yet finished with him. When Sinwulf woke up, the fever was gone, and he was, against all expectation, alive. He never forgot that vision. He believed for the rest of his life that he had been spared for a reason. Sinwulf became, in the years after the plague, one of those rising young men I described earlier. With so much land suddenly available, he was able to take over fields that had belonged to families who had been wiped out. He grew prosperous. He married a woman from another village, a widow named Edgith, who had also lost everyone in her family. They had 4 children together, and 3 of those children lived to adulthood, which was a remarkable thing in those years. Sinwulf became the chief man of his village. He was not a king, he was not a warrior, he was a farmer who had survived. But he was the kind of man on whom the new society of Anglo-Saxon England was being built slowly, quietly, in villages all across the eastern half of the island. He died at the age of 71 in the year 596. He was buried with grave goods, a small amount of them, a knife and a brooch, and a wooden cup. His grave, unlike Ælfgifu's, has actually been found by archaeologists. Not Sinewulf specifically, of course, because we do not know his name, but graves like his, from villages like his, all across the regions that would become the kingdoms of Anglo-Saxon England. We can still see the grave goods today. In museums, they are humble objects. A simple knife, a simple brooch, a small wooden cup. They are the surviving traces of lives that we know almost nothing about, lives that nevertheless shaped the world that we live in now. Sinewulf's children grew up and had children of their own, and those children had children, and so on, generation after generation. By the year 800, the population of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms was finally beginning to recover from the plague years. By the year 1000, the recovery was nearly complete, and a new England was beginning to emerge. An England that would soon be invaded by the Normans, an England that would build the great cathedrals of Canterbury and Durham, an England that would in time send its sons across the world to build empires that would speak the language Sinewulf had spoken to his grandchildren, the thread that connects you, the person watching this video right now, to Sinewulf in his village in the year 596 is unbroken. You are speaking his language. You are heir to a story that he was a small, unknown part of. And that, I think, is the lesson of the Plague of Justinian. The lesson is not that catastrophe is inevitable, though it is. The lesson is not that we are all going to die, though we are. The lesson is that even the worst things that happen to human beings are not the end of the human story. The people of the 6th century lost more than we can really imagine. They lost their children, their parents, their lovers, their friends, their kings, their gods, their cities, their books, their certainties, their hopes, and yet they did not stop. They did not give up. They buried their dead, and they planted their fields, and they had more children, and they told their stories around their fires in the long winter nights, and they kept the human race going. They are the reason there is a human race today. Every one of us is descended from people who survived the Plague of Justinian, or who survived the Black Death, or who survived some other catastrophe that we have forgotten because they did not write about it. So when you finish watching this video and you go back to your life, I want you to remember Ælfgifu and her daughter Hild. I want you to remember Brother Cadog and the brothers he buried. I want you to remember Sinewulf and the fields he ploughed in the long, slow recovery from the worst year his world had ever known. These people are your ancestors, not literally perhaps, but spiritually, historically. They are the human beings on whose suffering and endurance the world you live in was built. And the only thing we can do for them, the only debt we can repay, is to remember them, to say their imagined names, to tell their stories, to refuse to let them be forgotten. That is why I made this video. That is why I make every video on this channel. Because the past is not just a foreign country, it is the country we still live in, even though we do not always see the walls. The plagues of the 6th century shaped the islands of Britain in ways that we are still living with today. The language you speak, the religion that surrounds you, whether you practice it or not, the boundaries of the modern nations, the myths and the legends, all of it traces back, in some small or great way, to those terrible years between 536 and 549, when the sun went dark and the death came and the world was almost lost. I want to thank you, sincerely, for staying with me for these 35 minutes. I know that sitting through a video this long is no small thing in a world that wants you to scroll, to swipe, to move on to the next thing. The fact that you stayed here, that you listened to these stories, that you sat with Ælfgifu beside her daughter's grave, means more to me than I can say. This channel exists because of people like you, people who still want to take the time to think deeply about the past. So now I want to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it in the comments below. What video do you want me to make next? What part of history is calling to you? Do you want me to take you deeper into Dark Age Britain, into the lost kingdoms of the Britons, into the rise of Wessex, into the coming of the Vikings? Do you want me to walk with you through the Black Death, the 14th century catastrophe that some historians believe was the true sequel to what we have explored today? Do you want me to take you to a different part of the world entirely, to the Tang dynasty in China, to the Maya cities of Central America, to the great trading kingdoms of West Africa? Tell me. Write it in the comments. I read every single one. I make these videos for you, and the next one I make will be shaped by what you ask for. So please take a moment, scroll down, leave a comment with the video you want to see next. Your suggestion might be the one I choose, and if it is, I will give you credit in the video itself. While you are down there in the comments, if you have not yet subscribed, please consider subscribing. Hit the bell so you do not miss the next one. And if this video moved you, if you learned something, then please give it a like. Each like helps this channel reach more people who care about history the way you and I care about history. My name is Walter. This has been Walter Reconstructs History. The dead are gone, but they are not forgotten. Not while we still speak their names, not while we still tell their stories, not while there is one person somewhere willing to sit and listen to the story of a young woman kneeling in a wheat field beside the grave of a child she loved. Until next time, thank you for watching. And remember, the past is closer than you think.